I'm sick today, so I thought it would be a good idea to record a video. Um, this is a video from the channel Jimmy Talks, and he's going to talk about his critique of libertarianism. This is going to be a blind reaction, so let's go into it.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Jimmy Talk. So let's talk about libertarianism a little bit. On the surface, it sounds appealing, everything that they say, because they're talking about freedom and the Constitution, and taxation is theft, and everybody hates the IRS. You know, every time taxes, that kind of time in the season comes around, I fucking hate it. And I think everybody can also agree that the federal government is very bloated and it's just strangling this country. But when you actually look at libertarianism, we don't find allies as right wingers. It's kind of just as destructive to the American nation and
Allies as right-wingers? Good. I don't think we should be seeking allies with right-wingers.
the Christian faith and our European heritage as anything coming out of the progressive
There's plenty of things about Christianity that are just not compatible with libertarianism, I'd argue, so...
left. In fact, in many ways, libertarians are just the useful idiots for the liberal regime. They are wolves in sheep's clothing who open the gates for the very tyranny that they claim to oppose, and I will tell you why. And before I even start, there's like 10% of libertarians that I like. The other 90% are just libtards in disguise. But anyways, the fundamental problem with
Well, what does that mean? Like, your liking of libertarian individuals or not, you're critiquing libertarianism as a whole. So are you trying to say that the 10% you do agree with while the 90% you don't agree with? Or are you trying to say that you disagree with all of them but 10% are chill?
libertarianism is that it treats human beings like interchangeable economic units rather than spiritual beings with a culture and a history and a nature that requires order. So I'm pretty much going
I'm curious to see why he thinks that is so, but there's nothing about libertarianism that necessitates that at all, so...
to be attacking libertarianism, and I fully expect to get some heat for this, but it is what it is. So I think that libertarians, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, operate on this childish notion that liberty is the only value that matters. But I'm going to be totally honest with you. Letting people do whatever they want is not civilization. It's really stupid.
Well, letting people do whatever they want is not the equivalent thing to liberty. When we let politicians do whatever they want, I don't think that's liberty at all. There's a very clear distinction of what is your right and what is not your right, and that is whether you are initiating a force or a threat, initiating aggression upon other people, or you are being initiated upon using force or threats. It's a very crude outline of the non-aggression principle, but immediately you could see that he's equating the libertarian creed with do whatever you want, which is not the same thing.
Liberty without morality is just degeneracy. And that is the key facet that libertarians fail to grasp.
Libertarians do not fail to grasp this. This is not a necessary condition of libertarianism for you to reject all forms of morality except for considering human rights. There's nothing about libertarianism that is like that. Do some libertarians, do their moral code only extend insofar as their libertarian creed? Sure. And are they degenerates? You could call them that, sure. Why not? Why not? You could say that a degenerate is just someone who is just morally deprived and does not consider morality. So a libertarian that only considers morality insofar as the non-aggression principle or the libertarian creed, I can understand that. But there's nothing about libertarianism that necessitates that your moral code is only the non-aggression principle.
When this country started, we had immense freedom. We had so much. We had liberty. But at the same time, 99% of the population was Christian.
The foundation of our country is not what libertarians aim for. They do not aim to return towards the foundation of our country. Libertarians do have respect for the classical liberals and the revolutionaries of the American Revolution and spreading these Aristotelian, Lockean, and proto-libertarian ideas. But classical liberalism and all that jazz from the American Revolution and libertarianism today, it's not the same thing, and they're two different separate goals. first things first is that we must establish that a libertarianism is necessarily also anarchism. They're one and the same. And I can already assume that this guy probably has a limited government definition of what a libertarian is, but there's nothing coherent about grouping together anarchists and limited government status together because they share fundamentally different values and they have fundamentally different goals. And their ideal society are light years apart. It's a radically different society to have no government versus even just a limited government. And so, all right, so then then he's not really talking about libertarianism. He's talking about the limited government people who may or may not call themselves libertarians. But if so, if that's what he thinks, then maybe the purpose of this video, if you can take anything away from this video, is to know that true libertarians are anarchists. Full stop. The first political usage of the term libertarian was actually used by anarchists. Its first usage of its term was actually used in a metaphysical context. Metaphysical libertarians, such as myself, I'm also a metaphysical libertarian. They believe in the position of free will and they oppose determinism. Which then, that term was adopted by the anarchists, such as Benjamin Tucker or Lysander Spooner. The true tradition being held is found with the anarcho-capitalists or the rest of the Rothbardians. Murray Rothbard is the true torchbearer of liberty, and our tradition are the true libertarians. But with that understanding corrected, we can tackle these critiques and dissect them to know what he's referring to as just plain old right-wing propaganda and actual true liberty.
Baseline was a shared European heritage with a shared moral framework. The founding fathers didn't create a government for a chaotic, atomized mob of atheistic consumers. Like, get excited for the next product so I can consume. John Adams also said this very plainly. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate.
Well, if you can believe it or not, I'm actually a direct descendant of John Adams. But also as a libertarian, I will confidently say the Constitution can go fuck itself. I don't give a shit about a piece of paper. I don't give a shit about the authority of the US Constitution. I don't care that some white people, white old men, wrote down on a piece of paper some hundreds of years ago saying that Congress has the right to levy taxes. I'm sorry. Why are you bringing up the Constitution so much? You have such a limited government view of libertarians when right there in the Constitution it says the Congress has the right to levy taxes. So you're saying that libertarians, they love to say that taxation is theft and they love to talk about the Constitution. Well, you're primarily mixing up two groups there. The origins of the phrase taxation is theft, my bad, that taxation is theft, comes from the anarchists. And those who like to suck the dick of the Constitution, they're just statists who like to use the term libertarian for their own ulterior motives or their own delusions.
To the government of any other. Hey, come on, he said it himself. But libertarians read the Constitution like it's a suicide pact. They ignore the moral and religious part and just focus on the freedom part. But you cannot have one without the other. If you give absolute freedom to a population that has no moral compass, you do not get a free society. You get an insane jungle. You get chaos. And eventually people will beg for a tyrant just to restore some semblance of order. You can disagree all you want, but that's just a fact. Take the drug issue. All right, let's talk about the libertarians' POV on drugs. This is where the libertarian brain rot is the most obvious because they want to
This is where the statist brain rot is most obvious. He's probably about to defend something heinous and disgusting and violent. He wants to talk about morality. I mean, let's hear what he has to say, but I'm willing to bet he's about to defend the right of violence against people who smoke a plant or whatever.
Criminalize everything. And I'm not talking about marijuana, weed, there's an argument to be made there. I'm not even totally...
I mean, that's just arbitrary. You're just like, okay, weed's okay, that plant's okay, but this plant or this substance is not okay. It's arbitrary.
Against weed. I don't like it personally, but there's an argument to be made for a legitimate medical use, purpose. I don't like when people use it recreationally either, but let's be totally honest, it's not as damaging as like crack, okay?
I mean, damage is not the essence here. You can damage yourself all you want, but you own your body. Do I endorse it? No, but it is your right to do whatever you want with your body. I may think of it as damage, but that's not my prerogative. That's not my business. My property and my body is my business. And I may critique how you conduct your life, but there are human rights.
But it's stuff like meth and fentanyl and heroin. The libertarian argument is always, well, it's their body, buddy. It's their choice.
The alternative would be essentially rape, because if you don't value the sanctity and the sovereignty of everyone's body, then the logical extreme must be you don't even value the consent of other individuals and what to do with their own body. So by that logical extreme, nothing's off the table, including rape. You either accept the sovereignty of everyone's body, or you accept rape. I know that it's a harsh and very extreme argument, but this is the logical conclusion.
It's just a Darwin Award. That is an absolutely retarded way to run a society. Let me ask you this. What is the purpose of the state? What is the purpose of a government if it
To enrich in the ruling class, to expropriate the slave class so that the ruling class can be enriched and powerful?
cannot do something as simple as keeping poison out of the hands of its own citizens? We are not.
You think that's the job of the government? You think the government's job is to keep poison out of individuals? You know whose job is that? It's your job to keep poison out of your body. It's your responsibility. Take some self-accountability. Statists are often like children. They need to cry to daddy government to solve all their problems. But they won't even take self-responsibility. Talk about morality. I consider myself a highly morally conscious individual, and I like to think about morality and ethics within and beyond libertarianism. So from a libertarian perspective, I say this is abhorrent because you are denying the sovereignty of every individual and the right to their own body. And beyond that, on a moral level, you're negating the moral responsibility that every individual has to their own body, that they must take care of it themselves and cultivate it themselves. It is their body after all. And if they mismanage it, if they abuse it, that's their responsibility. Your responsibility is your body.
Isolated atoms floating in a void. That is not what humans are. We are a community. A junkie, for example, shooting up in a park is not just exercising his liberty or something. He is a.
And your idea of community is to send armed thugs to cage individuals for exercising their bodily autonomy? You think that's loving? You think that's moral? You think that's community?
A blight on the neighborhood. He is a danger to children. He is a drain on the resources of the productive citizens.
So disassociate. Don't let the community associate with such a junkie. But association is an individual basis. It is you who associates with other individuals, and it's your choice to associate with the individuals you want to associate with. And a moral and godly community that, like you speak of, that we'd like to cultivate a moral and godly community, needs to put and set boundaries. Not all individuals should be associated with. Not to say that junkies should not be associated with. I would encourage that we should help all individuals and give everyone a chance to pull themselves out. And so if there is a junkie in your community, instead of shunning them and exiling them, bring them into the fold and help them out. Of course, there's just, some people don't want help. And at a certain point, you just gotta disassociate. And that's it. But that's part of the Libertarian Creed. The entire point of the Libertarian Creed is the freedom to associate or disassociate with whoever you like. That is the entire point.
Now, I'm not calling for a return to the 1990s style war on drugs or what have you. But it is basic common sense. It's logic 101, actually, that you keep drugs made in some guy's bathtub or a sketchy lab in China or Mexico illegal. You use the law as a deterrent. You don't just shrug your shoulders and say, no, live and let live. Darwin
It is a terrible view of law that law should be a deterrent for crime, when law should actually be carrying out justice for the victims. The victims need to be restored as much as they can. Whether if they were financially robbed, they need to be financially restored and then some. The justice system should be about restoring the individual to its state before the crime happened and compensating for the victim, since it was the victim who was attacked. But rather, we hyper focus on over punishing the criminals, which requires the theft of the victim through taxation to pay for the punishment of the criminal. If you want to talk about morality, I don't think it's very moral for one's philosophy of justice to be devoid of concern for the victim. But that's what our justice institution has been for a very long time. It has not been in restoring the victim, but rather putting down the criminal.
An award because the inevitable result of the libertarian policy isn't just people doing what they want. It's state subsidized suicide. So look at what happens when these policies get enacted that they are so in supportive of. You don't get a free market of drugs if you were to just legalize everything. What they want is something called safe injection sites. I argued with this guy before. I think it was on Discord. This was years ago. I wasn't even doing YouTube. I don't even really remember who he was or what it was. I just remember this conversation. But anyways, he said we need to have safe injection sites. He wanted everyone, like the taxpayer, to pay for basically overdose facilities. I've had libertarians seriously argue that this is a good...
What fucking libertarian is advocating for government subsidized safe injection places paid by the taxpayers?
Good solution. It's places where junkies can go, shoot up safely, and if they overdose, a medical professional paid for by your tax dollars hits them with Narcan so they can wake up and do it again tomorrow. Do people seriously think that's a good idea to have in a neighborhood, near a school? You know, you think free junkie centers are the hallmark of a high-trust society? No, absolutely not. People are not incentivized to get clean when you give them a padded room to do drugs and just destroy themselves.
I mean, maybe. It's not really my expertise, but let me even just grant this for the sake of argument. So what? What does this have any effect on libertarianism? Just don't do that. That's a bad idea. But that has nothing to do with that everyone has the right to freely associate or disassociate. Also, I don't know who he was arguing with that supposedly happened on Discord years ago. That doesn't sound like a libertarian to me. Someone who's advocating for taxation.
That is not liberty. That is just the state aiding and abetting the destruction of its own people. That's absolutely fucking insane to me. Now, libertarian economics. Let's move on to that. Libertarians worship the free market like it's a god.
Actually, you don't have to be for markets to be a libertarian. The libertarian creed is just the principle of non-aggression. Like I said, the right to voluntarily associate or disassociate with whoever. Which means that in a libertarian society, people have every right to form communes, and massive communes, and try to formulate some sort of system of voluntary communism. I think it will completely fail. Most libertarians subscribe to an Austrian economic school of thought, somewhat, at least, and that's just because free market economics and the non-aggression principle go together like peas and carrots. But free market economics is not actually a necessity to libertarianism at all. You don't actually have to think like that. But even if it's not a necessity, of course, most libertarians are also going to be coming from an Austrian free market perspective, of course. So it's worth talking about.
In a vacuum, sure. I'll give them that. The idea sounds nice. In a small and demographically stable, high-trust country, a free market is great, actually. But we don't live in that. We don't live in a perfect textbook. We live in modern America. A totally free market in a country like this never works out the way that they promise it would. Basically, it always ends in one of two.
When did we ever have a free market? If we had a free market, there would be no United States ruling class. There would be no governments whatsoever. You can't have a free market with government. The only time that free market is truly existing is when there is anarchy, which we've scarcely seen that in human history.
Ways. Either the government and the corporations collude together through backroom deals and lobbying to crush the little guy, like small family businesses in Main Street, and it ends up being all about Wall Street instead, or the market gets so insane that one massive monopoly ends up running the whole entire country anyways.
I wonder if he will argue how the market will just naturally create monopolies like that. I wonder if he has an argument.
So the fact of the matter is we need regulations. Not the shitty excessive red tape that we have now. Of course there's an argument to be made there.
Unfortunately, he doesn't realize that regulations is what creates these oligopolies and what creates these monopolies. For example, Disney has a monopoly on Star Wars because supposedly they have an intellectual property right in the brand Star Wars. But there is no such thing as intellectual property rights. And so in a free market, anyone would have the freedom to make Star Wars content and distribute and sell it as they please. It's only because of the regulations of intellectual property that Disney has maintained a monopoly on the Star Wars IP, because particularly it is viewed as an IP that has led to, honestly, the destruction of Star Wars. Disney has completely fucking ruined it. But this isn't about Star Wars or Disney.
There's nuance to everything, right? But regulations to prevent slave labor factories from undercutting
Slavery is against the libertarian creed, so
American workers and importing H-1Bs, and to prevent distinct moral hazards is kind of needed, you know. But ultimately, it comes down to a deeper rot, and that is the banking system. Now on this, I actually agree with libertarians on the diagnosis, big time. Like, we need sound money. I'm all about precious metals. I'm always talking about it. Especially if you follow me on Twitter, you know I am. We need to return to precious metals. The Federal Reserve is a criminal organization. Totally agree.
well, at least we can get on board on
the
that.
libertarian solution of just let the banks do whatever doesn't work in a fiat-based debt economy.
That's kind of an internal debate with libertarians between free banking versus the Rothbardian view that fractional reserve banking is always fraud. So I won't speak on behalf of libertarians here. I will only speak on my own behalf. That I don't think banks have the right to do whatever they want. I do believe that fractional reserve banking is fraudulent always. And if we see fractional reserve banking in a free society, they ought to be shut down as they become a criminal institution.
Banks don't operate on equity anymore. They operate on debt. That is how the whole country works. That's the American economy. It's all ran off of debt with fake paper money. So the banks don't take a hit if they invest into something and the company fails. They don't care. They throw out loans to anyone who wants them, like student loans, mortgages, business loans. Literally any retard ever can get a loan. It's kind of crazy. But they will collect interest off the backs of these people. It doesn't matter how stupid someone is, they can get a loan anyways. That is how banks make their money. So this basically encourages a never-ending debt cycle that enslaves the population. This system does not benefit the small business on Main Street.
I'm not sure why he's talking about this, because he just established like a minute ago that we all agree on this, that the banking system sucks and it is completely horrendous.
Benefits the massive conglomerate companies on Wall Street.
Yeah, like we all agree on that. And you even said yourself earlier that libertarians agree on this. I don't know what is going to be his point following up from this, but we'll see.
The banks want to work with the massive companies because it's efficient. They want to work in tandem with the government, and we saw this in 2008. The banks failed in real estate crash. Did the free market punish them? No. No, the U.S. government...
What free market? What are you talking about? You're delusional. There is no free market.
It stepped in and bailed them out because these companies were just too big to fail. That is the reality of the system we live in. Libertarians will say, though, that wasn't real capitalism, but that doesn't matter. That is the reality of power. You cannot separate economic power from political power.
Yes, you can. Just abolish the political class. Just get rid of the state. Seems pretty simple enough.
We need an economic system that favors the small family business and the farmer and just the local guy. And we need to crush the big banking cartel, not give them more freedom to give predatory.
But you already said in the beginning that that you already acknowledged that libertarians agree with you, that the entire banking system is a criminal enterprise. So you already said in the beginning, so make it make sense. Now you completely switched, and now you're saying that libertarians actually agree with the criminal enterprise that is banking. It doesn't make any sense.
Loans to the American middle class to destroy it into oblivion. Now, this leads us to the issue of borders and the nation itself. This is the biggest rift between myself and libertarians because libertarians believe in magic dirt theory. They believe that America is just a piece of land with some lines on a map, and that anyone who steps across those lines becomes an American with their new piece of paper.
No, no, libertarians don't believe that. Libertarians believe there is just land. As in, like, you can move to a different continent. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong to moving to California if you live in Zimbabwe. There's nothing wrong to moving to Japan because you were born in, I don't know, South Africa. It doesn't matter. It's all just land. What libertarians say, at least the ones that are consistent, will say that, well, government is nothing but superstition, it's fake and gay, and therefore government borders are fake and gay. It's pretty simple.
They believe in the idea of a propositional nation, like Vivek Ramaswamy would tell you, that as long as you sign a piece of paper and you pay your taxes, you're just as American as a descendant of the Mayflower. And that is a lie. Demographics are destiny. People have gotten on my.
I just don't give a shit if you're an American or not. If you're an American, it just means that you're from America. And if you're not an American, it just means you're not from America. It does not matter to me, and it does not matter to any libertarian.
My ass about this, and Jimmy, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. That it's just a fact of the matter. Don't hate me. I don't make the rules here, right? Culture is not some abstract concept that's floating in the ether land. It is the biological and historical identity of a specific people. Libertarians refuse to acknowledge that high trust societies like the one America used to be are actually pretty rare. They are also fragile. They are the result of centuries of shared religion, shared blood, and a shared struggle, a shared identity. So when libertarians advocate for open borders because they want the free movement of labor, it's all about economy and materialism to them. They are advocating for the permanent destruction of the right. They will look at a Somalian who got here
Permanent destruction of the right? Sounds based. I'm on board.
yesterday and a man whose family fought in the Revolutionary War, and they see two identical economic units. Oh, like, oh yeah, that Somalian who got here yesterday, yeah, he should have a gun too. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I mean, I guess if you think that Americans are superior human beings and everyone else is a subhuman, and that they don't deserve the same rights as Americans, and Americans deserve the right to bear arms, but no other humans are not allowed to bear arms because they're from Somalia. Sure, you can view Somalians as subhumans. I wouldn't call that moral. I wouldn't call that godly either. Maybe I would call that Christian. I don't know.
But back to the economy part, they're just kind of blind to reality. Third world immigrants from third world countries, they bring third world voting habits and cultures. They vote for big government. They vote for the welfare state. So by cheering for open borders to get cheaper labor for Amazon and Walmart, because it's all about GDP and the economy to them, libertarians are importing the very socialism that they claim to hate.
Usually libertarians, especially from the Austrian perspective, are highly critical of GDP and what it's trying to measure and what it actually means. But we won't get into the stuff about GDP.
They are selling out their grandchildren's future so that the GDP can go up by 0.5 percentage point. They prioritize the economy over the nation. But the economy is supposed to serve the family. The family is not supposed to be fuel for the economy. Now, I know a lot of libertarians are like, well, I don't support open borders. And that's fine if you don't, but they will also turn around in the same vein and say something like this. Well, the economy, you need to be more competitive than them. Well, you kind of can't. This is the reality of free market shit, by the way. A nation that cannot produce its own goods let's outsource everything to China. A nation that relies on Chinese slave labor for its steel and microchips, it's not a sovereign nation. I don't care if it's cheaper to buy plastic garbage from overseas.
He's so hyper focused on the nation state that he forgets that libertarianism is not concerned with the nation or the state. It's concerned with its creed and its principle that applies to all human beings. It's about the equal rights that we all deserve as human beings. So he has such a American narrow nationalistic view when the libertarian is speaking beyond America. It's speaking for all human beings and for all rational animals, for whatever aliens that might be of similar intelligence to us or higher out there in the cosmos.
If it means the Rust Belt is completely destroyed and American men die of opioid addiction and unemployment, it's not worth it. It doesn't matter if the market's better. I am an economic nationalist because I care about the well-being of the American people, not the stock.
Yeah, it's just shitty. You just care about the well-being of a particular group instead of just the entire human race. Again, is that godly? Is that moral? I don't even think that's Christian anymore.
Portfolio of whatever, right? So this blindness extends to the Second Amendment as well. I am a Second Amendment absolutist, but within the context of the Constitution. That's the difference. We have to be honest about who the Constitution was written for. It says it is for ourselves and our posterity. It was written for European men and women of that time period who were Christian.
Yeah, but the Bill of Rights were based on natural right theories at that time, based on Lockean right theory. And that's not just for Americans, that's for the entire human race. And the Second Amendment belongs to the Bill of Rights.
And of high moral character. Libertarians will advocate for gun rights for anyone. It's absolutely insane.
It's not insane. That's literally, like, the foundation of our Bill of Rights is founded upon natural rights theory and natural law theory, which applies to all human beings, like I just said. It's really crazy that you think that only Americans deserve the right to bear arms. I think that's pretty un-American of you. If you really supported the rights to bear arms, you'd support the right to bear arms for every individual, not just Americans.
They'll fight for the right of a communist to own a rifle. They'll fight for the right of a violent revolutionary to arm himself. Dude, that's suicidal. It is too lawless. And then they'll be like, oh, you're a redcoat, you're a bootlicker. Like, if a group of people like communists or Islamists or leftist Antifa fucking dirtbags openly state that they want to destroy the Constitution and overthrow the nation, extending the constitutional protections to these insane people is a death wish. Like, get fucking real. They would rather the country burn down than be told, well, you're a hypocrite. Get real. The Constitution is not a magic spell. It is not a suicide pact. George Washington would look at a communist Muslim running amok in America in 2026 and he'd be like, what the fuck is that? He wouldn't say, well, he has a...
I mean, this is despicable behavior. You just don't think that just because someone believes in communism, which can extend from tanky to anarcho-communism, just because they adopt the label of communism, whatever that means, that they just don't have the same human rights as before. Again, you're thinking in superior human beings, the Americans, and everyone else, the subhuman beings, who are lesser than human, that don't deserve the same rights. Again, is that moral? Is that godly?
Natural right to bear arms, just like me. He would see an enemy combatant, actually. But our country has changed significantly since the 1700s. It has gotten too big, it's gotten too diverse, and it's gotten too divided as well. We have to interpret the Constitution through the lens of survival. If the government deems you an enemy, they will take your guns. That is true. Libertarians aren't wrong about the danger of the state. But the root cause is not explicitly state power. The root cause is who wields the state power. We need to stop pretending.
That is very despicable that the power does not matter, but it's just who wields it. So you don't care about absolute power. If someone is wielding it correctly, then it doesn't matter. And then, yeah, you are a bootlicker. Those libertarians, whether they are libertarians truly or not, calling you a bootlicker, well, you are a bootlicker. You just said something very bootlicky. You just licked the boot right there. That you think that restrictions on power, let alone the true libertarian position, which would be no power whatsoever, no ruling class whatsoever, no state whatsoever, but you think that there should be no limitations on these power because it just matters of who's wielding it. That's very tyrannical. You think that tyranny and a tyrant is okay, so long as the tyrant is on your team, the right wing. Well, guess what? We do have a right-wing tyrant now. And if you care about your gun rights so much, that right-wing tyrant and his goons, they call themselves ICE fucking publicly executed a man in Minneapolis. I don't even need to talk about it. You all know what I'm talking about. That's what absolute power gets you when it's the guy from your team. Now, is he a Trump supporter? Is he not? I don't know. But he's a right-winger, so I don't know. Whether it's Trump or not, left or right, someone's in absolute power. People are going to be publicly executed for exercising their basic human rights.
That a 2026 communist is a fellow citizen, like the Constitution from the 1700s said. They are subversive. And in any sane society, the Communist Control Act would have been enforced 20 years ago already.
Well, if you care about the Constitution so much, then let's just have the Constitution only made for white property-owning Americans. Since that was the Constitution was made for white property-owning Americans, males, white men, white property-owning men. That's what the Constitution was made for. So all the other Americans who do not qualify like that such, do you think the rights should extend to them? Because that's not what the Constitution was made for. So if it wasn't made for a communist, why would it be made for a black guy? And if you don't think that basic human rights extend to a communist, then why do you think it would extend to a black guy?
In a perfect world, these people would be kicked out of the country because they hate America anyways. You can't build a free society with people who want to enslave you with their destructive ideology. But libertarians don't get this. They operate on this suicide pact logic where they would rather let the country be conquered by subversives than violate the principle of free speech for enemies of the state. But ultimately, and I mentioned this earlier, this brings us to the core philosophical failure of libertarianism. It's the rejection of hierarchy and the embrace of neutrality. They think everything is neutral. Libertarians claim the government should be neutral. They will say stuff like, live and let live.
Libertarians claim there should be no government. I have no allowance for this. If you're a minarchist, you're not a libertarian. There's nothing that we share in common. You still want a ruling class. I don't. People who advocate for limited government are different than the anarchists.
They say the state shouldn't promote Christianity, but it shouldn't promote atheism either. They think there is such a thing as a moral vacuum. And let me tell you right now, there is no such thing as a moral vacuum. If the state stops supporting Christian values, it doesn't become neutral, it becomes hostile. When you remove God from the public square, you don't get a blank slate. You just get a new religion. You get wokeism. That's the left's religion. You get the pride flag flying over American embassies. It's no longer a Christian nation because we wanted to get rid of it so bad.
Well, fuck your Christianity. Go make an argument for why Christianity is true. And this is a terrible video. You're not even making arguments. You're just like, no, Christianity. Doesn't matter. Doesn't convince anyone in the slightest. It only just reaffirms the right-wing nationalistic Christians, quote-unquote Christians, you call yourself, whatever a Christian means nowadays.
You get drag queen story hour at public libraries. Libertarians step aside and let this happen, though. They will say, well, it's a free country. If they want to read to kids in drag, that's their right. No, it isn't. That is degeneracy. That is a cultural conquest that is targeted at children. Libertarians are incapable of distinguishing between, air quote, liberty, which is the freedom to do good and to raise a family and to worship God, and, air quote, license, which is the freedom to do evil and to degrade yourself and to corrupt your community. They mix these terms together, liberty and license. Society needs direction, it needs hierarchy, it needs order. As a Christian and an American nationalist, I stand by.
There's nothing orderly about statism. Statism is the apparatus of expropriation of the masses. There's nothing orderly about it. It is antithetical to civilization. Civilization is built on cooperation and human community. And that means mutual benefit. That means free association. That means I scratch your back, you scratch my back. Cooperation together. But statism is not cooperation. Statism is slavery. It is forced cooperation. It is cooperation where the ruling class benefits, where the slave class remains slaves. And if statism is carried out too far, it will lead to the destruction of civilization. That's why states operate a balance between not expropriating too much and not expropriating too little, and trying to find the right amount of expropriation so they don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg, which is the productive man. You see, if I was a highwayman and I hold you up at gunpoint and I said, give me everything you had, and I walked away with it, well, that was a one-time robbery. But what if I kept you around and I only took a little bit every month or so? I have an indefinite supply of your slavery and your servitude. This is not how civilization is built. Civilization is built on productivity. It's built on free market transactions, which then a parasite, a ruling class, takes over. And they feed off the productivity of the productive masses. But people mistake that the state is what facilitates productivity rather than its greatest enemy.
The American virtues, and I love liberty. It is what makes this country beautiful. But liberty without morality leads to the financial and the moral decay that we are all living through right now.
I completely agree.
Look around you. Politicians are selling out to corporate lobbying in APAC. That's gross. That's degenerate. That
I agree too. I think that's bad.
is betraying your own people for 30 pieces of silver. Sound familiar? Anyone read the Bible here before? You know, the rise of OnlyFans? That is degeneracy. It's like, oh, it's the free market, buddy. Just let them do what they want. No, actually. I don't think we should just let them do that.
And now you're immoral. Now you're threatening violence on individuals, whether they're sinners or not, whether they're doing something good for themselves or not. Now you're threatening violence on them. Is that good itself? Are you moral yourself? Because what does it mean to place restriction on porn production content, such as OnlyFans? What it means is that if the individual goes ahead and exercises their right to upload sexual pornographic content of themselves, that you're going to vote for armed thugs to invade their house and take them away and throw them in a cage and kidnap them. What is moral about that? You think that's going to do anything? You think that's going to bring the sinner closer to God? You think that's going to bring the sinner to Jesus by violating their rights and throwing them in a cage? Do you think you're closer to God? Do you think you're closer to Jesus? You think Jesus would do that? You think Jesus would take a prostitute from a brothel, threaten them with violence and death, and throw them in a cage? You think that's what Jesus would do? I don't know. I know what I think is right or wrong beyond Christianity. Christianity is not my concern.
The commodification of intimacy and something that's very inherent to the soul. It's like, nope, they'll just sell your butthole for $5 online every month. There's stuff like hoflation, degeneracy. Rabid feminism destroying the family, degeneracy. All of this happened because we brought into the lie that there is no objective, air quote, good. We bought into the lie that
I thought liberty was an objective good that libertarians believe in. What is the subject of the video about?
everything is just a market choice. Libertarians look at a traditional family and a porn star and they're like, oh, these are two valid lifestyle choices. These are both the same. I see the best.
No libertarian would say that. Not for libertarian reasons. Maybe a libertarian would say that. but it wouldn't be because they're a libertarian. From a libertarian perspective, it's not about the quality of the lifestyle. It's about the metaphysical equality that we all share. That we all share equal rights.
Bedrock of civilization and the cancer that kills it, actually. Society needs truth, and it needs to acknowledge that some things are true and some things are false. Some ways of living are healthy and some are toxic. We need to return to traditionalism. We need to acknowledge that men and women are different, and that the family is the building block of the nation, and that the nation answers to God only. But libertarians deny natural hierarchy. They are egalitarians in denial. They think if you remove the government, everyone will magically get along and they will all trade peacefully. They ignore reality. People are different.
I mean, no, I don't think if you remove the government, everyone will get along. I just think if you remove the government, you removed the government. An institution of crime. Therefore, less crime is going on. Way less crime is going on.
IQ distributions are different. Cultural temperaments are different. And a society requires authority. Someone has to be in charge. It doesn't matter if it's a group of one and one other guy.
You know who has to be in charge? You. Of yourself. That's all you need. What he's advocating for is some other human being in charge of you, which is slavery.
Or if it's 10 people or 100 or 1,000, a million, it doesn't matter. Someone has to be in charge. Leadership's important. And if the leadership is not a righteous Christian hierarchy, it will be a demonic globalist hierarchy, or ran by somebody else. Cough, cough, you know who. Libertarians live in a fantasy world where power doesn't exist. I miss the classical libertarians. Those kinds of guys I fuck with. You know, at least their logic is coherent. You know, even if I disagree, at least they kind of make...
What does he mean by classical libertarian? Does he mean by classical liberal? Does he mean Hoppians? Does he mean the mutualists? Tuckerites? What does he mean?
Makes sense. These libertarians we have now are just like liberals because they're materialistic and they're egalitarian. That's pretty much it. That is why they are wolves in sheep's clothing. They side with liberals more than they do with us because at the end of the day, they are both materialists. They both agree that tradition is an option.
They're not siding with us. They're not with us on the right side, on the right wing. They're right there at the left. I don't give a shit about the left or the right. I don't give a shit.
Obstacle to progress. They both agree that religion should be private and it should be weak. And they both agree that national borders are impediments to the global economy. Isn't it really funny how liberals are like that now? But anyways, the libertarian just clears the path for the leftist. That's why they're always fucking siding together. The libertarian destroys the old moral laws in the name of freedom, their idea of fucked up freedom. Then the leftists will just march in right through the open door to impose tyranny. That's it.
Yeah, but like he just said, it doesn't matter about the degree of tyranny. It's just about who's wielding it. It doesn't matter about how much power you can impose upon others. It just matters about who's controlling that power. So long as that it's a right-wing American nationalist ultra-Christian that is in power and imposing tyranny, then it's all good. Then it's godly and moral. Somehow it's godly and moral.
We don't need more live and let live. We don't need more neutrality. We need a state that protects our borders and it punishes these disgusting vices and it rewards virtuous actions. And it puts the American family above the global GDP. We need to return to the values that actually built this country, like faith and blood and soil and honor. Anything less is just a slow death march. So, yeah, that's my problem with libertarianism.
He does not give a shit about vices because he is totally fine with controlling and enslaving people who disagree with him. People who disagree with him, he considers it a vice. And then he commits a vice greater than anything that the other individual could have committed. He advocates for committing aggression upon other people. That's a vice. That's a capital V vice right there, aggression. To violate another's personal sovereignty is viceful and it's immoral and it's ungodly. So for Jimmy Talks, I didn't know what this video was going to be about because it was a blind reaction. I'll just say that you don't have an idea of what the fuck libertarianism is. You have a perverted Randian view of it. So this video is not about libertarianism. This video is about people who call themselves libertarians but are not nearly consistent enough to be actually libertarian. But also in this video, he doesn't care about God or morality or vices. He's perfectly fine when a tyrant is on his side, on his right-wing red team, doing his bidding and his interests.
I'm sure somebody's going to disagree, and hey, that's fine. You may be different, but that's the thing with libertarians and the idea. It's very individualistic. So someone may be like, "Well, I don't believe that, but I'm a libertarian." Again, that's what I think the problem is. They're not working together as a coherent unit, which you would have on.
Yeah, you're right. There's not much of a coherent unit. You're right. You're completely right. That's a completely valid critique. I think we should work on that. I think we should definitely work on that. But in order to work together, we have to work together with real libertarians, the anarchists. Anyone who's not an anarchist is not it's not an ally. So if we want to save libertarianism, if we want to make it more coherent, then we have to go back to the basics. We have to go back to the basics of non-aggression and anarchy.
Under Christianity, anyways. So, yeah, I'll say that I'm a far right paleocon Christian nationalist. I don't know. I think I'm just the normal person now. I just follow the traditions that my ancestors and like pretty much the whole fucking world followed. Like,
yeah, I'm not very normal. Anyways, that's the end of this video.